Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Nichriadon, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Well, today I am delighted to welcome Chris Marshall to Life Beyond the Numbers. Chris, you're so welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I believe I'm ending the 100 zone, so episode 199, and you go into the next era. You did give the bombshell just a minute ago before we started recording, saying that maybe this is going to be the great new era, or maybe I'm going to finish your podcast, so I'll do my best not to be the latter.
You definitely won't. And I actually have guests booked in for later as well. And I definitely plan on doing an episode 200 as well. So there'll definitely be an episode 200 and a few more. And I have no intention actually of stopping just yet. And in fact, we're recording on the 19th of March and tomorrow, the 20th of March, is World Happiness Day. And one of the things that brings me happiness is having these conversations. So I am genuinely happy to have this conversation with you, Chris.
Do you know what? You've just kind of landed that with me. And as you know, we'll probably get into, I'm the founder of the Playfulness Institute, which obviously has massive links with happiness. And I had no idea it was National Happiness Day tomorrow.
International, global, world.
I'm writing down a note right now. I have learned something.
I have it in my calendar for every year, and I came across it a few years ago. And I don't know what these days really mean, because is it just one day a year? We all should be happy. But anyway, let's park that for the moment and perhaps come back to it a bit later. But Chris, we met after my own book, Leading Beyond the Numbers, came out, and you invited me onto your Being Playful podcast, which was an absolutely fantastic episode. I so enjoyed that conversation with you, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. And you're such a fascinating character. I just want to say that to you. And it comes across so much in your website. And I just want to read something out because I think it's a great precursor. Is author, researcher, behavior scientist, psychologist, psychotherapist, investment manager, podcaster, speaker, financial planner, and master distiller. And then in your Q&A on your website, one of the questions is, how does Chris manage to do so much? Does he ever sleep? Which I just thought was such a brilliant question, because that's exactly what I was thinking.
And yeah, the answer is I absolutely do. In fact, it's probably one of the things I prioritize the most, because without that, I'm not a very nice person to live with. Otherwise, I'm just quite groggy. It's actually taken me a long time to put this out publicly, that I do all these things and have all these different hats and have this experience, because we live in a world where we're so focused on, well, what's the one thing I do? What's my specialization? What's my niche? We live in a very hyper-specialized world. And to be, I don't know, this kind of polymath, I mean, even that word has taken me quite some time to be like, oh, am I blowing my own trumpet here? But for me, I got over that because I realized that what I'm trying to actually communicate, so yeah, I will talk loads about playfulness, but one of the things is we embrace complexity when we're playful. And complexity for me is just this wonderful thing. We're drawing together so many different sources of information and experience and everything else. And I felt a little bit fraudulent if I didn't actually show that in myself, that I kind of showed this pristine and like, oh, well, yes, I'm a behavioral scientist and applied psychologist. It sounds a lot more professional, but it misses the, yeah, it's very boring. But it misses the reality and texture of life, doesn't it? We all have diverse interests and things. And
And we
yeah,
aren't what we do.
no.
So I think that's one thing you're showing is like, hey, I wear all of these hats.
Yeah. Sometimes I
And
try and wear them all at once.
I think what was really fascinating in that was that what you said about embracing complexity when playful, because how many people would put complexity and playful in the same sentence?
Not very many, but then I don't. I think when you start talking to people about playfulness, they don't put much in the camp of playfulness.
Children.
Yeah, children, and oh well, yeah. When I have a free weekend, I go play some games with my family or whatever, and that to me is like the saddest thing I've come across in kind of even I'm going to bring this into human history is because we have been the species which has been adaptable, creative, imaginative, innovative. You can't look back through human history without encountering all of those different things in abundance, and hence why we've progressed at such a rate that we have. And that doesn't come from rigidity, logical, rational, deductive thinking. We like to think it does because that's what we've told each other to pat on the back, that we can drive this through just efficiency and reducing variability. But actually, it's about going beyond the current horizon. It's about seeing what isn't seeable. And as soon as we start doing that, we start having to enter into the scene playfulness. And playfulness, therefore, is we're able to sit with liminal states, so an incomplete, un slightly uncomfortable states where we can just stand back and go, I don't know the answer. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. So instantly, playfulness kind of throws us into that category where we have this, I'm going to throw a bit of a technical term in here, but a tolerance of ambiguity is kind of what we'd measure scientifically. This ability just to sit with noise. And I think it's one of the most underrated aspects of not only playfulness, but actually what it means to be human is when we're operating at our best. That's what we do. And in this highly disruptive world, that's what we need to do more of. So yeah, absolutely. Coming back to your point, not many people throw complexity and playfulness together, but I think we reduce playfulness to such a base level anyway in most people's thinking that we don't see it increases our learning speeds. We don't see it brings us together. We don't see it as a fundamental, like foundational part of creativity and innovation. We don't see it reducing stress. We just see it as something fun we might do when we've got a little bit of free time.
We don't see it as a tool for the office, I guess. As you were talking, I was thinking about gamification because we
Mm,
have gamified a lot of things to make, especially when it comes to trying to bring in a new habit, for example. There's
yeah.
all sorts of ways of gamifying that. So, do you think it's something that we're unconsciously aware of that it's helpful to us, but we kind of think, oh, we left that behind when we were in school or before school?
Yeah, and often before school. By age 5, we've left the toys behind. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to kind of like distinguish play and playfulness because I think that's helpful. And then that's going to bring it into the context of what gamification is and what I believe playfulness as culture is, because I think they're slightly different. So the first distinction, as I said, most people don't have a very good conceptualization of what playfulness is. But it makes it far simpler when we go play, which we all know what play is an activity, the involvement with doing something, playing a board game, playing sports, playing around with each other, whatever that might be. And then playfulness is a state of being. It's the mindset we bring to something, the embodied energy we bring to something, and therefore we can bring it to absolutely anything. Play we struggle to. Play we can gamify to bring it into the occupational sphere. We can gamify certain tasks to make them more fun and light and engaging. And absolutely, that works. But playfulness we can actually bring to absolutely any sort of task. And I'd say that even in areas that we just don't think that playfulness even has a place, let's take psychotherapy, where we're dealing with intense trauma, we're dealing with tense stress, real crisis and challenge in life. Playfulness acts as this unlocking mechanism. And we see it in so many forms of psychotherapy. If we take stories of adventurers, I don't know, take Serena Shackleton in a disastrous expedition that became the world's most admired, respected rescue mission of all time, where they got stuck on the Arctic ice fields for 10 months. I mean, ridiculous, isn't it? That all of them survived. And when you actually look at that account from a management and leadership point of view, we've talked about so many aspects of Shackleton, but we neglect the playfulness. And he understood, even if it wasn't at a conscious level, that playfulness was this, again, this mechanism to keep spirits alive and an energy in his team. So he played card games, dog sled racing, sing-alongs, plays, all of these things which were essentially so that he was using play to foster playfulness. And I think that's what sometimes we miss in the corporate space is we go, okay, we've gamified that, we've embraced playfulness. It's step one. We've found an activity we can play with and people like it. But have we taken that learning to go, look what happens when we're playful? We're suddenly more productive. We're suddenly more engaged. We love what we do. We thrive in times of uncertainty. So hopefully that distinction helps clarify a little bit more what playfulness might be.
It does. So I guess going back to, I want to tie this into the first answer you gave, which was about that ability to say, I don't know.
Mm.
And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about even in school, for example, saying I don't know was not a strategy that was recommended.
Still isn't.
Exactly. So by the time you do get into an organization, unless you've been brought up and conditioned to say, I don't know is okay, and it's not shutting something down, but actually it's coming from a place of curiosity and
Mm.
experimentation and perhaps that playful spirit. What is something someone can do in an organization who may be this way inclined already to bring this further into their culture?
Okay, good question. So, I mean, essentially, let's kind of peel this back and why? Why is it unacceptable, particularly in the professional space, to go, I don't know the answer to that? And you're absolutely right. It starts very early on. In our culture, we respect people who at least appear to have a very confident answer. In fact, what's going through my head is I can remember somebody just saying, if you don't know it, just say it confidently.
My dad used to say that to us, like, yeah, and it works,
Oh, it does, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
which is not the point.
No, and because if you're leading a team, then essentially that confidence of an answer can be a signal of safety for others. So there's a real reason behind why that works. And in a simple or even a complex world where we know the inputs and the outputs, that's fine. You just need to learn your material, build a certain base knowledge, and then actually you can say things with confidence that if we do X, we'll get Y. Unfortunately, in a disruptive world, in a complex world, we don't always know what the inputs are, and we certainly don't know what the outputs are. It's a far more experiential, and we are testing and probing and sensing what might work and what doesn't work. In that, we don't have the answers. And actually, this confidence backed answer leads to failure rather than the opposite. But we've respected this idea that if somebody sounds authoritative and gives a confident answer clearly, they must know what they're doing. We should follow them. In And so bringing this back, I'm kind of like losing where we started this conversation, but I'm going to carry on until I find my way back. And so in a disruptive world, what we want is we want to actually foster different leadership skills and management skills. And what that, I've now figured out what you asked me. How do we embrace this in cultures? For the listeners, I will do this. Sometimes I will go off track and never ever come back. Sometimes I will. You're lucky I have on this one. But what do this is it's that safety piece that if people feel safe, either we can do that through tricking them just by giving them a confident answer and they'll go, okay, well, he seems to know what he's on about, or seems to know what she's on about. Or we can actually just build a really safe culture where people are now free to go, I don't know quite what I'm doing here, or I feel a little bit out my depth. And actually, we're not only now talking about building the foundations of playfulness, but we're also knocking on the head things like imposter syndrome. Because I firmly believe, it's not, I have a belief that imposter syndrome doesn't exist. I just think much of it is manufactured by the environments we create, where there has to be this feeling that you know everything and it's perfect. And of course, you don't have anything to worry about because that's what everyone else is portraying. But actually building this safe environment and starting to open up. You mentioned curiosity before, which is one of my core pillars of playfulness. And we can do that through just clever use of language. These are really, really simple tools. Things like just play with that for a minute. Suddenly just invites people to relax a little bit and go, okay, well, we're not looking for a perfect answer. You're not judging me. Just play with that idea for a little bit longer. Or what have we missed? And if we use that language carefully, I mean, what have we missed is very different to what have you missed. So there has to also be that collaboration coming into it from the manager and the rest of the team. But space can be opened up, and those are uses of playfulness. In that what we're doing is we're allowing somebody else the permission to suspend reality. Now, obviously, if you take that too far, you become delusional, and we're not we're not talking about that extreme. But the suspension of reality is such a fundamental part of playfulness because it allows us to take our focus off what is straight in front of us and look at what other possibilities might exist out there. And it's just that lifting. Our imagination is a suspension of reality. If we think about what we might be doing in 5 years' time, that's a suspension of reality. We have no idea really. But the exercise of just lifting up, and we can do that with anything right in the present moment too, is what don't I know about this? What if I just play with this for a minute? Hopefully that gives you an answer. Sorry, it took me about 30 minutes to actually get there.
It didn't at all. And there's something so powerful and so simple about that. Let's play with this. And it takes the pressure off. It's
Mhm.
not saying you have to come up with an answer to that before we leave here, which makes everyone go into a tunnel vision.
Mm.
Anyway, and you use the word delusional. I mean, that's delusional.
Yeah, yeah,
Quite
yeah.
frankly, because once you put stress on people,
Mm.
they're just not going to be able to access their imagination. They're not going to be able to access possibilities. They're going to be in that fear state, even if they don't recognize it.
Yeah,
And it always amazes me, I suppose, Chris, how little we understand about how humans work in the workplace.
yeah.
We put so much into technology and getting technology to do this, that, and the other, when actually, if we understood our own brains and bodies better, we would get much further with people.
Completely. So this is something I pull up in the book that's coming out, so The Playful Advantage, or might be out by the time this episode's on air.
Just out.
Just out. Okay. And that traces this cultural narrative because I think for me, when explaining playfulness, it's really important to look at, well, how have we come to this current belief of what playfulness is and isn't? Why do we think it's unacceptable to bring it to work? Why do we adopt this stressed and serious position and think that's successful? We have like some really weird values and beliefs. And actually, that point that you're pulling up about the workplace, and if we only really embraced humanity, the people who actually work there, radical idea, wouldn't it? When we trace it back, I always say that we're living with this industrial era hangover, but we're no longer in an industrial world. And when you look at the principles of the industrial era, it was all about efficiency. It was all about reducing variability. Actually, most of the forefathers of the industrial management idea, absolutely, if they could live today, they would have no people in their factory at all. They hated the human. It was just seen as a really inconvenient thing, but something I must suffer to get this bit of steel out the factory. And so we've been living with this idea that humans need to be managed, not empowered. And I think that's the fundamental switch. And I think we're tipping on that point. You're adding to this voice. There's loads of other people adding to this voice that, hold on a minute, if we could only just switch from that management of people to empowering of people, my word, the amount of productivity, the amount of innovation, the amount of just people enjoying what they do would be absolutely phenomenal. But 200 plus years of cultural conditioning, which is really slow to get rid of because we like doing what we've always done.
Which again comes down to how our brains work because of neuroplasticity. So those pathways are just ingrained in us. They're in society everywhere we watch and read. That's what we are getting fed. And so anything new, like what you're talking about, which isn't necessarily new, but it's something that is available to us that we're not using, and what I talk about and others, there just isn't the neural pathway as such for us. They're there because we
Yeah.
all know what it's like to have that light-hearted approach to things because that's how we started out. As children learning to walk, we fell on our bums and we got up and we laughed about it. It didn't stop us from walking. No one shouted at us going, come on, you have to learn to walk before the end of today or else.
There's a deadline of 5 p.m.
Yeah. And if you don't walk by then you're finished. You're never going to be chief executive. I think we all have it in us. And we talk about the management perspective or the leadership perspective. Actually, I wonder if this revolution, because I do think it has to be a bit of a revolution, has to come from the ground up as well. Because we are all responsible for ourselves ultimately. And if you don't like how you're treated at work, you can also do something about it. You can be the catalyst in your organization. Because what I find in the work I've done over the years and still do, your natural leaders or your influencers or persuasive people are often not in a leadership position, but they can show others how it's done. And I think I would be rooting for everyone to bring this approach and see what happens. Take a playful approach towards it. Be playful.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, what's come to mind as you're explaining that. So within the Playfulness Institute, one of the things we do is we kind of run workshops for teams. And we've started to print posters and give them to these teams that they can then take back to the office. But it's a playful poster which just really says, this is a playful space. Take responsibility for the energy you bring with you. And it's just that reminder. And there's going to be bad days. We all have bad days. And this isn't about you must show up playful. This isn't a KPI.
Thank God for that.
We'll assess you at the end of the year of what energy you brought, because that could be the next move. We're not really banking on or wanting. But the idea of that poster is just to remind people, actually, if I show up most of the time in that space, it doesn't just affect my work. It doesn't just affect how I make decisions. And let's be honest, most of us in this modern world, we're paid to think. And yet we pay no attention to the quality of our thinking. We just turn up and just go, well, hopefully some good ideas might come today, which is bizarre, right? Coming from a sporting background, I never showed up to a competition going, well, let's just see what happens. Hopefully I ate all right and I did some exercise before this. Everything is planned so that you're at your prime. Yet in the workplace, we don't pay any attention to prime thinking. Where playfulness is, to my mind, that sweet spot where we have cognitive flexibility, we can embrace other people's, we're fully connected to our cognitive resources. But yeah, it just reminded me that we started giving these posters to the teams that we do workshops for. So it's just a kind of a joking, friendly reminder of actually this is a common goal and we all have a part to play. It's, yeah, all you need is one catalyst, actually. That's what we're finding, is you just need one catalyst in a team who opens up that space for others.
Who isn't often the team leader. They don't have to be. And I think that's the beauty of it, because your
Yeah,
team leader might be great at other things, but just may not have that persona as such. But
yeah.
somebody else can create that environment. Now, Chris, you, like me, but in a different way, but your background is from the financial industry. So again,
Mm.
like that kind of blows my mind. How did you get from investment banking to this?
So I joined the finance industry in 2007. So still involved to this day. And at that point, I was with one of the big global banks. I was a financial planner. Little did I know I was entering that world just before the great financial crisis. Otherwise, I might have made a different career choice. But actually, joking aside, what it showed me, and I think really what struck me, so obviously I've mentioned before that I was an athlete. And actually, I've got to say, I was technically good, but I was an anxious athlete. And that doesn't really marry very well for great results on competition day. I could beat everybody in training. And then come race day, actually, my anxiety would overtake me. And so, talking about the effects of stress, I wouldn't perform anywhere near my potential. As I then came into finance, you forget those lessons, those learnings kind of follow you. And what I was seeing as the stock markets crashed, as housing prices crashed, was like people just kind of like some of them completely losing their mind and actually selling everything at the bottom and just going, oh my word, this is going to work out really badly. And others actually buying assets that were now distressed. And I suddenly saw all the lessons from my sporting background transported into this arena. And then all of a sudden I was hooked. And from there, I actually went on and did. So my master's was then in behavioral science. So I was looking at kind of mental toughness and resiliency. Obviously, I just nicked those from the sporting arena, which is often what researchers do, and applying them to the investment world. And how do these conceptualizations actually manifest in investor behavior? And do they protect us from investment losses and gains and things? So that then followed through. I then most recently was head of investment strategy for a boutique investment management firm. And what you're finding, talking about ambiguity and uncertainty and chaos, is in the investment markets are just that. Every day, I mean, you don't even know necessarily what's driving something which is visible. Until it's finished, you can see it in hindsight, but in real time, it can't be seen. And so I started to look at those concepts of things like, well, how do you sit with massive amounts of uncertainty? How do you sit with this idea of ambiguity? What makes good decisions? What makes bad decisions? What happens when we're highly stressed to our decision making and our relationships and our feelings and our outlook? And it's at that point that I started to see that actually mental toughness and resiliency is brilliant as they've been in describing a lot of things, undersell the human condition. Mental toughness and resiliency are normally portrayed in a way that something bad happens and you bounce back to where you were. Us humans are capable of something far greater, and that is something bad happens and you grow. So we're now talking about post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress or just resiliency. And as soon as we get into that arena, it's where for a long time I couldn't quite believe it was playfulness because it sounded so silly. Like what on earth is playfulness doing showing up over here? But when you actually start looking at all the research, and we've got now about 30 years of research, so it's a growing field within the adult space, playfulness. But when you start looking at that, playfulness has this ability to reduce tension in us, reduce stress in us, to find meaning in things, which is often the key to making sense of the world around us. And it allows us to get to this place where we can play with the uncertainty. We can play with the ambiguity. We don't have to make knee-jerk reactions, which are often the ones we end up regretting the most because we just had to close that uncertainty gap as quickly as possible to feel a little bit of safety. And so actually the investment market, although most of my work now, on certainly on the playfulness side, is within the organization, was born in the investment world because it's a place where they're used to dealing with chaos and disruption. And I believe that chaos and disruption is now coming very rapidly to businesses. I mean, they're already experiencing, I think they will even more as we see all these different pressures on them, from AI to climate change to cultural change, where people are just going, I don't want to do this work anymore. It doesn't fit with my values, to massive amounts of workplace stress, burnout, job dissatisfaction, lack of productivity, disengagement. All of these things aren't going away. In fact, all the numbers are saying they're increasing. And those challenges suddenly bring the human right back into the center. And I think the lessons that I've certainly taken from the investment world now carry through. That was really the motivation of setting up the Playfulness Institute, was to take all this massive wealth of research and information on playfulness as our superpower, and how do we now translate it into something which is usable by leaders, managers, team players, anybody, but how does it help us in the professional part of our lives?
Amazing. I need to listen to that again, almost to absorb it, because there was so much in it. And the thing that kept coming to me, I suppose, was how we're regressing. And COVID was this shock, and okay, maybe we overtalk COVID in a way, but it did disrupt and it showed people what was possible. But it
Mhm.
seems like once we got back to normal, whatever the hell that ever is, we're almost doubling down on what we did before COVID to get back to where we were before it, which is the antithesis of what we should be doing. And I heard, I don't know if you know David Whyte, but he's a poet, philosopher, and author. I'm a big fan of his stuff, but he was talking about a workplace incident in his life where he was getting to burnout and exhaustion and all of that. And he sat with some brother, somebody or other, I can't remember his name, who listened to him and said to him, David, the antidote to burnout and exhaustion isn't rest and recovery, it's wholeheartedness.
Mm.
And that's what's coming up with the playfulness, because it brings in that feeling of love and joy and things that maybe we don't want to talk about in a workplace, but actually those things make us human.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what a lovely way to kind of picture and place playfulness, because you're absolutely right. It's us when we're fully us. That's the easiest way to describe it. Let's just think about some of the things that work against you normally is a fear of judgment, a fear of being wrong, a fear of others ridiculing you. All these kind of things float around, don't they? When we're playful, we're not even aware of ourselves, let alone others. That we're completely and utterly just absorbed by it. And there's an energy that comes with it. So coming back to that poster, that's why I purposely use that word energy. This is a playful space. Take responsibility for the energy you bring with you. This isn't, oh, you've got to do these 5 steps and jump through 4 hoops and then make sure you recite ABC backwards or whatever. This is Playfulness is our natural state of well-being. We are playful when we are well. That's it's a really simple thing.
And we're well when we're playful.
Yeah, absolutely. And playfulness actually not only is the outcome of wellness, but is also the catalyst for it. That it keeps us there. It helps make sense of the world around us and this ambiguity and setbacks, and you'll know from your work with emotions, joy and the positive affect that comes from positive emotions is so fundamental. This isn't just about being happy or smiling a bit more. When we experience that positive stream of emotions, we start to explore more. We go beyond the current horizon. We become innovators. We become creators. We empower others. And those are the things which follow playfulness, is one of the attributes. We've talked a little bit about what playfulness is. if listeners are hoping for a single line definition, it doesn't really exist because it's one of those amorphous terms that we intuitively know what playfulness is, but we can't categorize it. It's like holding a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze it, the less you hold. It's an absolute nightmare from a research point of view, but there's something beautiful in that as well because it seeps into absolutely every part of our lives. And with that positive affect, the positive emotions, one of the things that shows up in nearly all the definitions of playfulness is the sense of joy. It's more than just flow states. It's more than just using imagination. It's also the presence of joy. And that's a protective factor. Coming back to that idea of burnout, and it's not just about rest, it's not just putting your feet up, but it's about finding that energy again. I see that actually, one of the places I see that the most, well, two places, is when I'm doing coaching with executives. So that's one place. And I feel really sorry for some of them because the tools they've been given don't work. That's essentially, so the management tools I'm talking about, that the schools of thought that we've got harken back to that industrial era. Yes, we've got some really creative stuff going on. I love some of the stuff going on in agile management and things like that, but they're still process orientated. They're not people orientated. And when you switch that switch, so you see it in that coaching setting beautifully because you're working one-on-one with somebody and you see that energy come back and just almost the lights come back on. That's a really harsh way of saying it, but there's a revitalization, there's a refueling going on. And all of a sudden they bring a whole new energy to their work and their workplace. And the other place, almost at the other extreme of life, is in the psychotherapy session. Is depression is potentially the opposite of playfulness. It's a state of no energy, of no positive possible future, of rigidity, black and whiteness. Whereas when we manage to switch that round, suddenly we find options and possibility. We find joy, we find energy, we find everything in between. And that's the healing mechanism in a psychotherapy space. And when you see it at both extremes, people are highly, highly accessible in the coaching space. And actually, at some of the lowest moments of people's lives in the psychotherapy space, you see playfulness transcend everything. And when it's missing, we really are missing something. I think that's the easiest way to put it. And when we have it, it's joyful, it's light, we're being productive. We have this intrinsic motivation. We don't need tons of external reward because playfulness itself is a motivating factor. We want more of it. Just look at kids playing on video games. They don't need an external reward from mum and dad to go, oh, can you go play another hour? They're quite happy playing because it brings its own reward. And that's what we've lost. What I'm talking about isn't new. In fact, this is so foundational that we see it not just in the human species, but mammals. Play is so fundamental. This isn't some new concept, but it's actually who we are as a species.
And I had this question floating and it has just
It's now gone.
disappeared. It's now gone. Let's talk about your book, Chris, because your second book, I know you've already written a book and you've written your second book, which is coming out on March 24th.
It is.
The Playful Advantage. And you mentioned it briefly, but tell somebody who might be thinking about buying it, what
Why?
what's in store for them?
Why
Who
bother?
needs me to buy no? No, talk about the book, your book, what you've spent ages working on.
Yeah,
It's
I
no
think
mean
I actually
feat.
have to put it in context of the first book. Although they touch on completely different areas of life, I see the Playful Advantage as the follow-on from Decoding Change. So Decoding Change, so talk about my work in the investment industry. Obviously, I have this behavioral science background, fascinated by futures thinking about scenario planning and how we make sense of the future and make sense of things. So decoding change, one of the things I was seeing was people were being freaked out and stressed by the level of change They knew the world was disruptive, but they couldn't tell where it was coming from. So decoding change took the view of if we concentrate on trends and megatrends, these really slow moving forces, such as let's take an aging global population. We've known about this for about 30 years. It's going to be an issue for the next 30, 40, 50 years. You don't need to read up on it tomorrow to see exactly where we are. It's quite nice and slow. And the whole point was if we start dipping below the noise that the 24-hour news cycle feeds us and actually concentrate on the real world and what's driving change, is that we can cope with that speed of change. The outcome of decoding change, however, was that we are about to enter, in my view, probably the most disruptive period in human history we've ever gone through. And that's because normally when we see disruption in our history as a species, it's come from just one or two mega trends acting at once. So it could be the natural environment, or it could have been a technological shift. Now we have all of these trends all intertwined, all accelerating each other, working as catalysts. I mean, and it's all happening all at once. And that's unfortunately the environment we're going to have to work through in the next 30, 40 years. The playful advantage then really picks that up and goes, okay, well, if this is going to be a really highly disruptive environment, how do we guide our organizations? How do we lead our teams to thrive in that? Not just cope with it, not just, okay, we got through another day, let's see if we can do it again tomorrow, but how do we actually thrive in that environment? Because again, all the stuff we've been talking about, that's what playfulness is our adaptability mechanism. But we're not embracing it, and therefore we're not very adaptable. We're rigid. And that is like the worst thing we could possibly be in a fluid environment, is going down that route of, well, this is how we've always done it. We're just going to keep doing it this way until one day you're not in business anymore. So the playful advantage picks that up. And the reason I chose the organizational space, partly because I was working with organizational leaders anyway. So they were certainly part of that. I really enjoy speaking to business audiences. But I think the other reason is I see that we are a species who are extraordinarily social. We belong in tribes. We have a real sense of community. And actually that is a protective factor and also one of the foundational pillars of my view of playfulness. So this idea of connectedness. When we're playful, we're more connected. The issue through our transition into this era is we've disbanded and ripped up most of the areas of community. Most people don't know their neighbours on the street. They might know the one next door, but tell them who lives 10 doors down? No idea. We've got rid of so many other places and replaced it with digital and online social media platforms, which give us a fake sense of community. We don't see people's vulnerabilities. We don't have that same connection on them. In fact, normally it ends up just being I feel inferior, which isn't really community at all. So my view is that the business organization, which has these shared values, shared beliefs, a common goal, is actually potentially or should be this incredible place of community where we actually feel belonging, we do our best work, we work towards this shared vision and goal for the organization or the team. And so that was the why I focused on that area. And it's also the area which is still stuck in the Industrial Revolution. The idea of the playful advantage is it takes you through really kind of the research that we know about playfulness within adults up to this point. And the research is ongoing, but it takes us through how learning speeds increase, why in teams that playfulness can open up. We can now start learning from failure, not just burying failure, which so many organizations do because they're afraid to bring that forward, but they're then missing the creative and innovation opportunities. How playfulness, let's take Google or somebody. The irony is they stick slides in the waiting room and lobby, completely missing the point of playfulness. That's just play. But they pick it up somewhere they never talk about. And they pick up something called whimsical playfulness in their, I don't know whether you've come across their 20% of work time that they get to spend on their own projects. So whimsical playfulness is a style of playfulness where we notice the novel, the obscure, what other people miss. And so there's how an organization has harnessed that to bring that knowledge inside. And when you look at the outputs of that project for Google, I think the browser came from it. Some of the biggest things that Google now do came from that, because when we're playful, as we've been talking about, we look beyond the current boundary. It isn't just about, well, what do we know in the circle? It's like, well, what's happening over there? I'm curious about that. And so it takes leaders through all of that so that they, I think, because one of the biggest things is understanding how playfulness works, that it's not something silly. I'm not trying to teach people to be childlike or muck around or just be the office clown. None of those things are really playfulness. And then it just finishes with, I believe there's a three-pronged approach to developing it within organizations from what I've seen from the work I've done within companies and teams. One is this state level of playfulness. So what state are we in right now? And we have mechanisms to be able to learn that, and we can do that. The next is trait level. So that longer term, personalities aren't fixed. I think Myers-Briggs did a wonderful thing trying to teach us that it was, but there's very little evidence behind that. And all the evidence, if we look at it in science, nearly all the evidence says that our traits change as we go through life. They're malleable, and playfulness has the beautiful traits that we can learn and embody. And then the final piece is, how do we embed playfulness into a culture and a climate of an organization? And we run through kind of things like psychological safety, the value piece, the vision that people can attach to and find worth. So it reminds me always of that NASA story of when the janitor was asked, "What do you do here?" And he goes, "I'm putting a man on the moon." When we have a sense of belonging, it matters to us, and we can easily bring playfulness to that space. So that's where the book goes and why it focuses in that way. I just hope that it gives managers and leaders a new tool. It doesn't replace anything. I'm not trying to say, oh, this strategy that you've used over here, you should bin it. Absolutely not. But we need to bring people back into that. And playfulness for me is a lens which allows you to do that.
Thank you, Chris. And we are at time, even though I could definitely speak to you for longer, because I feel like I only got started. If people want to know more, how do they get in touch with you, Chris? And I'll put all of this in the show notes.
So, I mean, if they want to contact me personally, probably LinkedIn is the best. Just search for Chris Marshall. Otherwise, I mean, the work that I'm doing on playfulness, head over to the playfulnessinstitute.org. We've got tons of resources over there looking at how playfulness can be embedded in organizations. You can actually take my playful assessment if you want to find out how playful you are. That's completely free. You can do that and it'll give you an answer straight away. And yeah, if you want to engage in the coaching and workshop side that the Institute does, then that's the place to head.
Fantastic. And the book is available on Amazon.
It is, yeah, from the 24th. I better not forget that, hey. That'll be up on Amazon. The audio book will be launching in about a month's time, but be available paperback and Kindle from the 24th of March.
Fantastic. And the Being Playful podcast, of course.
And yeah,
available wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to
listen to me just rabbit on a bit more, then yeah, head over there. You can hear me and Susan rabbit on a bit more over there as well, actually.
Exactly. From a different perspective completely. Yeah, the roles reversed. Chris, thank you so much for your time today and for such thoughtful, inspiring answers. Actually, I'm really looking forward to listening back to this because there is so much in it and I really want to unpack it a bit more. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.